So if you have small children nearby in your living room within earshot, or you may want to invite them to head into a different room, you can put me on mute. I'm sure many of you have dreamed of the moment where I invite you to put me on mute. Go right ahead. I welcome that. For those who are able to listen to a message that isn't entirely suitable for small children, here we go. When I was in second or third grade, I remember going to school one day and I was excited because Christmas was coming. Christmas was on its way. And I remember talking with my buddy John one day and talking with John, and I'm like, hey man, Christmas, right? You know, he's like, yeah, Christmas. And I'm like, Santa. And he's like, nope. And I'm like, what are you talking about, John? And he says, you know, Santa's not real. And I was like, John, I don't know what this blasphemy is that you're talking about, but I'm not willing to hear it, man. Like, Santa has been hooking me up for years. Every Christmas, this dude is legit. Like, and he's magical. He's got reindeer and he flies around the world and he hits every single house in one night. Don't try and tell me that ain't real. And it just, you know, it was this like moment where I was like, John is clearly off his rocker. Santa's real. And then, but also there was this like nagging sense that I couldn't shake throughout the rest of the day that came home with me. And I remember, I think I was in the kitchen with my mom later that day. And I kind of had this moment where I was like, Mom, I need you to level with me here. Is Santa real? And she said, you know, geez, honey, of course Santa's real. And so that was a moment that really challenged my faith in Santa, but I'm very grateful to know that Santa is real, and he comes every Christmas and gives presents. Just kidding. Right. So, you know, and of course my mom's like, yeah, he's real. And, you know, then I finally really pressed the issue and she's like, all right, you know, she gives in and she's like, well, not really. And then she sort of explains what happens. And for me, it was this moment, right, where I realized that, you know, my understanding, my image, my vision of who Santa is was shattered. I realized that Santa wasn't real. And it was a scary moment. There was a scary moment of seeing the myth and the magic and the wonder of Christmas just vanish. It was scary. But that moment of sort of deconstruction, this moment of deconstructing my faith in Santa, it's still, as challenging and hard as that was, it didn't last forever, because even though I knew Santa didn't exist, you know what happened that Christmas? Presents still showed up under the tree. And there was still blessing, and there was celebration, and there was beauty. And yes, it was a little different, and I knew that it was my parents who put those presents under the tree, but it was still powerful and wonderful. And there was a different kind of magic and wonder, because Santa may not have done that, but my loving parents blessed me with some gifts. And then I grew up a bit, and I realized that, you know, as I grew up, the Christmas wasn't just me getting showered with gifts, that there was an invitation to be part of something bigger and beyond just myself. And there was this unsettling, again, of some of the magic and the wonder was lost. So, I mean, what do you mean? I have to like give things to other people? What's that all about? And then I remember as I got older, there was this idea of giving gift toward other people that initially sort of took away some of the like I'm at the center of the universe wonder and magic. But then I realized when I got to participate in that and then give gifts toward other people, there was a different kind of magic and a different kind of wonder and beauty in participating in Christmas. And so there was this second kind of like wave of transition to something different. And then I grew up some more, and I learned more about the spiritual implications and the claims of the Christmas story. And so then, I'd gone from this Santa's real, and then, all right, well, it's okay, but gifts are still I still get tons of gifts. And I'm like, no, I'm supposed to like give some gifts to other people. And then there was this sort of next phase where I realized that Christmas actually, it's more than just like gift giving, and that there's actually some powerful claims and powerful implications in the story of Christmas. And so there's this moment of continued challenge that had sort of moved me to another moment of unsettling realizing that I had been missing so much for so long, and I had missed so much of the central message of the Christmas story for so long. And then I realized that there was an importance in giving gifts, and not just giving gifts, but giving gifts to Jesus and the marginalized, right? The whole, hey, if it's Jesus' birthday, shouldn't we give him the presents, right? And what does Jesus say? He says, when you give and serve the least of these in this world, you're doing that to me. And so there was this sort of, again, unsettling deconstruction of what I had thought Christmas was, and it was this invitation into a different kind of magic and wonder. And then we had kids. We have our kids, and our kids are now 5 and 6, and they're not gonna, they don't get to hear this sermon, because they're still in that stage. They're still in that place of wonder and excitement with Santa, but for me, again, let's bring it back to me. They'll get their day on Christmas, but so I'm excited to celebrate Jesus and offer him birthday gifts and sit with the profound implications of the Christmas story, and I'm moving into this, and so my experience with Christmas has changed over the years, and now in this like really kind of like cool moment, I'm like almost going backwards. Right, I still give gifts to others. I still receive gifts from others. I am each year sitting more and more with the implications of the Christmas story and the spiritual claims that we see with the incarnation of Jesus, and now with our kiddos, right? Santa is real again. And so now I'm in a new stage, a different kind of magic and wonder with Christmas. And I think if we're willing, our spiritual journeys, our spiritual pathways following Christ can have a similar kind of path, a similar sort of pattern of unsettling moments that lead us toward deconstruction, and do so in a way where some of the wonder and magic and beauty is lost, but we see with new eyes, and we see something new and powerful and beautiful and wondrous and magical, and there's this new kind of experience that isn't what it was, but it's still something good and beautiful. Reverend Dr. Monica Coleman says this. She says, part of the spiritual life is losing your faith and finding it again. And losing it and finding it again. And when we find it, it won't be like the one we lost. It will be okay, but it won't be what we lost. Are we willing to enter into this kind of journey of faith in Christ that grows in a way that's true and it's honest and it's real, and it's a journey that's willing to learn in such a way that perhaps some of the wonder and the magic and the beauty is lost? And sometimes that happens repeatedly. But when that happens, we find our faith again, and we experience this new kind of wonder and faith and beauty and magic. And it's different, and yet it's actually bigger, and it's more powerful, and it's more true. But of course, in order to do this, we need to make room for doubt. We need to make room for hard questions. And so I think sitting with the text in Mark 16 is helpful for us. And I'm going to read the ending that we sat with last week. This is Mark 16, verse 8. Jesus has appeared to the women at the tomb. Or I'm sorry, there was a man in the tomb, most likely an angel. Mark is claiming here, and he says that Jesus has been raised. He's not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you'll see him just as he told you. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So that's the text we ended with last week. And then it continues in verse 9. And all that had been commanded them, they told briefly to those around Peter. And afterward, Jesus himself sent out through them from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. Which raises the question, which is it? Which did they do? Because in 8a, it says they fled from the tomb, terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And then it continues in the same verse, and it says, and all that had been commanded them, they told briefly to those around Peter. Which is it? Did they say nothing, or did they tell all that had been commanded to them? I think there's a quote here from Peter Enns that is helpful. He writes, when we open the Bible and read it, we're eavesdropping on an ancient spiritual journey. We're eavesdropping on an ancient spiritual journey. So 8a, the first part of verse 8 ends with this mystery, this unknown kind of sense of terror. And in 16:8b, there's this declaration of great hope that they share this good news. And of course, then it ends with this, after Jesus himself sent out through them from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. And so if you read this, and you read this at first glance, it's kind of like, well, which happened? And I think here is that moment. Here's the moment when perhaps we can read the text in a way that embraces this invitation both to lose our faith in a way that's perhaps unsettling and challenging, but then find our faith again. Losing parts of our faith in a way that we may find them again, and we find them in a way that's different. It's still filled with wonder and beauty and meaning and purpose, but it is different. And here's the invitation. You see, the original ending of Mark was in all likelihood 16a. In all likelihood, the original writing, the original manuscript of Mark's gospel ended with, they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And the original writing of Mark was probably this sort of, shocking moment where it ends abruptly, and the original readers, the original audience were left sitting with this moment of like, whoa, right? This sense of, well, we obviously have heard this good news. It was written down, but this left with this like shocking end where they're forced into this moment where they have to decide how they will respond to this good news of Jesus. And that was probably the original ending. That it probably ended right there. I think most scholars would agree with this. And that 16b and following, because there's even more to the rest of Mark 16, that 16:8b and following, it was most likely written about 100 years or so after Mark's initial composition. And then within the next 500 years or so, the process of canonization, of deciding what is in, what's out of the Bible, what does the church acknowledge as divinely inspired words of God, and what is not. And so that takes place over the next 400 to 500, 600 years. And it would take place now, and we have an original ending to Mark's gospel that is sort of added on to. And now, today, when we read Mark, we have an ending to Mark's gospel that may not have existed in the original manuscript. And so now we have an ending that ends Mark's gospel on a positive note with hope and encouragement, where originally it ended with shock and awe and fear. And of course, the fact that the gospel itself exists, right? And the fact that we, its readers, exist, it affirms this reality that of course, the women didn't really remain silent, right? They must have shared the good news, because it's like this weird thing where it's at the end it says they didn't tell anyone, and yet the fact that you're hearing this story, whether you heard it in 75 AD or you hear it now, the fact that you're hearing this story, you know that they didn't just remain silent forever, but of course they shared this good news. Especially when you consider the fact that Mark's gospel is generally understood to be the first gospel account written that we find in the New Testament. And so it's not like Mark took, Matthew's gospel and was like, all right, well, I'm going to, like this was this acknowledgement that Mark is probably the earliest gospel written. And so therefore the fact that we are recipients of this good news of who Jesus is means that these women didn't remain silent, of course. And then about 100 years later or so, the church at that time decided, we're going to add to this, and we're going to write it in concert with other gospels that have been written. We're going to write it in concert with the movement of the church, and we're going to celebrate this idea that, of course, these women from the tomb of Mary and Salome, they knew that they had to share this good news of Jesus' resurrection. Of course, even with the original ending, again, people would have known that they didn't keep the news to themselves. And if the gospel had been written down, the account of his life, death, and resurrection inspired a written manuscript of that good news. And even before that, so some of these apostles, like Paul and Peter and John, they had written letters to other believers instructing them in the way and the knowledge of Christ. And I think it's okay for us to sit in this tension. This tension of two different endings that may, like at an initial reading, seem contradictory, but when we read with a deeper sense of meditation, when we read with within a broader concert of scholars that acknowledge, the later endings were probably written about 100 years later, but they're not necessarily like in contrast to the broader witness of the gospel. They're not in contrast to the movement of the early church. The underlying message still remains, of course, that Jesus Christ is risen. He is the Son of God, and his kingdom is now. And so what say you? What say you? Peter Enns has another quote that I think is helpful here. He says, church is too often the most risky place to be spiritually honest. What a travesty. What a travesty that we can't read a text like this and ask some hard questions about it. I hope we are always a church that's willing to ask some hard questions, to be spiritually honest, to be a place that invites moments of unsettling realities that shift us out of a rigid and very kind of black and white faith that challenge ideas that we may have about Scripture or faith or prayer, but to do that in a way that is in community together, that it offers encouragement with one another, and like the quote earlier of Coleman, this idea that we can lose our faith in ways that we can find it again, and the core hope and the core sort of belief remains. And we find our faith again, and it's different, but it's still good and true and real. One of the avenues that we do this together as a church, by the way, is our pub and theology nights, right? We jump on Zoom and we ask hard questions. And sometimes just fun questions and just dialogue together. But we want to make that a safe space, a welcoming space, and an encouraging space where we can sit and ask questions about ourselves, about God, about all this stuff, and be willing to encourage one another in ways that lead us toward the way, the truth, and the life, right? Jesus. And this might be a challenging word for you, and maybe this is a word that right now doesn't inspire a deeper hope in the resurrection of Jesus, but maybe instead it gives way to a feeling of doubt or disbelief. And And if that's you right now, welcome. I'm glad you're here. I really am. And perhaps the part of the additional longer ending of Mark may bring you some comfort. So if right now you're in this place of, okay, well now I'm just sitting in this place of unsettling and unknowing, and there's bigger questions and bigger doubt that I've had before with all this stuff, and so thanks, I'm really glad I tuned in. Let's move on. Stay with me and let's read. Let's continue reading. Verse 9, this is Mark 16:9. Now after he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went out and told those who had been with him while they were mourning and weeping. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. After this he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking into the country. And they went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them. Next week, we'll jump into how Jesus appears to the 11 and they don't believe, and he gets up into their business a bit, but we'll talk about that next week. But I think what's important here is we read, and so we see that Mary goes and tries to tell people, and they don't believe it. And then Jesus appears to in another form to 2 of them, and then they try to tell the rest, but they won't believe them. And I think if you're sitting in this space of increasingly doubt and uncertainty, welcome. Know this: disbelief has been a part of the church from its very inception. Disbelief and questioning and doubting and all the things where people are sitting there and they're encountered with the good news of Christ's resurrection, and they respond with skepticism or I don't believe, that has been a part of the church from its inception. We, living in 21st century Central Coast, California, we are not the first generation to have a hard time believing the good news about Christ's resurrection. We are not the first. We will not be the last. This has been a part of the church from its very inception. So if this sense of unknowing and doubt and unsettling kind of feeling with your faith, if this is like a new thing to you, if this is scary for you, take comfort, and you can read the ending of Mark's gospel and see that doubt and uncertainty and disbelief in many ways are continuing a tradition within the church. And I don't want us to always just sit and stay in that space, right? I think it's helpful to acknowledge that there's room for that. Again, the hope is to lose our faith in moments that help us find it again. And we find it different, but we find it still true and real and good. So if our time together has left you in this space of increased doubt and skepticism, welcome. You're continuing this ancient tradition of the church. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. You may sit in that space. You are welcome to sit in that space. You may sit in honest uncertainty and doubt and unknowing. Welcome. And you may sit in that space having lost a part of your faith with the hope that you may find it again. I hope that you find it again. When I encounter those times and those moments and those spaces, I hope that I find it again. And it will be different, and that is okay. And some wonder and mystery may be lost, but you will find something new and filled with wonder and hope and magic as you find your faith again. And just as you think of your own participation in Christmas from when you were a kid, it changes, and it's not what it was, but it changes and perhaps grows into something more powerful and more beautiful and more true. And above all, may you, and all of us, may you be caught up in this great movement of the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation that we have received from Jesus Christ. May it be so. Amen.